Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of Carroll County for April 2nd, 2025. Welcome, everybody.
Evening.
Can we establish a quorum?
Yes, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Mr. Kirkner? Mr. Kane?
Here.
Mr. Huff?
Here.
Mr. Robertson?
Here.
Mr. Swayson?
Here.
Mr. Lester?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Mr. Gordon? And Secretary Daly.
Here.
Vice Chair, please let the record reflect that we have 6 members that are present. We do have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
In Genesis.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll keep going while you're settling in here. Has everybody had a, I guess I should ask Daphne first. Any changes to the agenda for this evening, Daphne?
Not tonight.
Okay. Has everybody had a chance to review tonight's agenda? Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll second.
Okay. All right. Agenda's approved.
Sure. Thank you. Yes. Okay. So, has everybody had a chance to review the minutes for February 18th?
Yes.
Okay, I'll take a motion.
Make a motion that we approve the minutes of February 18, 2025.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, they stand approved. Number 6, administrative report.
I
Secretary
do not
Day-
have anything this evening.
Okay. Any other? No?
No.
Okay. Number 7, the concept site plan for Evapco Contractor Storage Yard. Mr. Beecraft. Hello. Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Evening.
Good evening. It's hard for me not to say good morning. That's the only time I see you guys. David Beecraft with the Bureau of Development Review. So we are mixing it up a little bit. We have one project before you this evening. As mentioned, it is the Evapco Contractor Equipment Storage Yard Project, file number S240009. And for those who are unfamiliar, Evapco is on the outskirts of Tawnytown city limits, so that's where we'll be looking. In fact, if you look at the map, this shaded area is the city of Tawnytown. With me are some reps from the project who I'll let introduce themselves.
I'm Jim Mathias with DDC. I also have with me today Chad Rindollar with Evapco.
And this project is before the Planning and Zoning Commission as a concept plan, so no action is required. However, as with every site plan that we bring to you, the commission has the authority to delegate final approval to the chair. Okay, so as mentioned, the property that we're looking at is right against the municipal limits for the city of Tawnytown. It's the highlighted property here. The property itself in its entirety is roughly 78, about 80 acres, but it is split 2 times. So the first time it is split is via Kraus Mill Road, and the other time it is split is via this railroad. So if we move to the next one here, here's Kraus Mill Road, here is the railroad here, and the property that we're looking at is this one in the center here. As you can see, based on this aerial, so this aerial is still pretty accurate. The property is still undeveloped. You can see that there is a stream that hugs the, call it northeastern property line, and there is a FEMA floodplain associated with that. There is also this planned major street, Tawnytown Greenway, that's shown on the plan. However, in talking with the city of Tawnytown, it was noted that they have, they're currently in the works of relocating that roadway. So regardless, what's being proposed here, it does not have any effect on the roadway, whether it remains on the property or if it does get relocated. Our focus for this project is going to be down on the southwestern portion. There we are. Down in this area here. And so if we move forward here, so to try to orient everybody, this is Kraus Mill Road here. What's being proposed is a 3-acre contractor's equipment storage yard. And the purpose of this is to work with the facility that currently exists there. So going back, this is the main headquarters for Evapco in the region. And what they're looking to do is, prior to shipping equipment out, they would like to store it on this new contractor's equipment storage yard, so that way it makes up more room for them to operate. And so there are no lights proposed, there's no signs proposed in conjunction with this. There will be a chain link fence that surrounds the facility, and the property is zoned agriculture, and a contractor's equipment storage yard is a conditional use within the agriculture zoning district. They did go before the Board of Zoning Appeals on September 26, 2023. And as part of that request, they did receive approval, but it was subject to 3 conditions. The first condition is that there would be no lights at this site. The second condition relates to the hours, that they will be from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mondays to Fridays, with occasional work on Saturdays with the same hours. And the third condition is that there's no manufacturing conducted on this site. It's solely used for the storage of equipment before being shipped out. The plan itself was received by Development Review and distributed March of last year. It was subject to citizen involvement at the Technical Review Committee meeting held April of last year. There were citizens present, and they did voice concerns of traffic to the site as well as the view of the proposal. In response to that, moving on to the next slide here. So this is the landscape that's proposed. As you can see, it wraps around 3 sides of the facility. And additional landscaping is proposed along Kraus Mill Road, as well as along this property boundary as well. So in these areas, the landscaping surpasses the requirement that we have within our landscape manual. So with this proposal, with the anticipated traffic to this facility, a traffic impact study was not required. The access to Kraus Mill Road was reviewed by our engineering review, and it was granted concept approval, but there's additional information that is needed in conjunction with the, moving back a slide here, with the site. There is going to be an upgrade to this pipe that runs underneath Kraus Mill Road. So that is something that would need further detail as we move into the final review of the plan. As mentioned, the landscape that's proposed is, it does meet the requirements, and it did receive concept approval. Evapco decided that they wanted to beef up landscaping between Kraus Mill Road and the facility, as well as that northern property that adjoins this proposal. Forest conservation will be addressed by on-site forest retention on the, actually it'd probably be easier just to show on this property that they own on the opposite side of Kraus Mill Road. So there's going to be a forest conservation easement required on this portion of land to meet forest conservation requirements. And stormwater management has granted concept stormwater management approval. It will be addressed via 3 submerged gravel wetlands on site. So, and those 3 are shown, there we are. Here, here, and I believe this one back here as well.
Correct.
Thanks, Jim. So in conjunction with these 3 facilities, as mentioned, they are going to have to upgrade this piping so that the water flow does not overflow the existing pipe there and cause any issues with traffic on Kraus Mill Road. And finally, so as with every site plan, this will be tested and reviewed for adequate public facilities. But I don't anticipate much issue with that since there's no additional public coming to this site. There's very little traffic in regards to this. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, such as Mr. Mathias here as well.
Just a couple for clarification. So this is not a storage building. This is just like a parking lot, gravel
Yep.
parking lot.
Correct.
So the equipment will be in tractor trailers and staged there?
It'll be hauled from their existing facility. It's the finished equipment, the cooling units that they manufacture
Okay.
will be hauled to this site while they wait transportation to somewhere across the country.
Okay. And the hauling to this area is within the site? You don't have to leave the site to get to?
No, you do.
You do. You have
You
to
have to go down
come out on
Krause Mill.
194 and then down Kraus Mill Road, yes.
Okay. And that's where you were saying that they're adequate, they're okay with?
Right. So when, as mentioned, that's how the equipment is going to get to the site. But the frequency of that did not trigger the need of any type of traffic impact study or anything like that.
Okay. And the weights are okay? Sorry, Pete.
Sorry, no, you're good.
The weights that are traveling across Kraus Mill is okay? It can handle those?
I believe so, yes. There was no red flags brought up
Okay.
during the review in that retrospect.
Yeah, so we're not going to store any vehicles on the site, so we don't need to worry about oil, gasoline runoff into the stream below you, so it's all, okay.
The only, and this came up, I think at the Board of Zoning Appeals, they do pressurize the units a little bit,
Okay,
but it's nothing that just wouldn't evaporate.
okay. And then, I'm only raising this because we recently approved a building, as recently as, I think it was before the pandemic, but that building's now completed. And they proposed a bunch of landscaping, and people brought up that they wanted that building shielded from a multifamily complex that had recently been completed. And we approved that site, and we approved the landscaping, and the landscaping that was installed, I'm just telling you, it's embarrassingly small. I mean, eventually it will mature. So you're kind of getting thrown under the bus here because of something somebody else did. What are we thinking in terms of this landscaping? Is it going to be, 5-gallon pot-sized container, or are we going to have some substantial growth or substantial size vegetation when you put it in the ground?
We're gonna do our best to, so they obviously can't be mature trees, but
Right.
yeah, we're not.
We want
gonna-
them to survive,
we're not-
too.
Yeah, we're not gonna put in gallon
Okay.
spruces and,
Yeah, I don't know how to word this, guys, but we did something down in, right there near Sykesville, and that building is it's completed, and the landscaping that we approved, I guess it's what we approved, but it's embarrassing. There's no shielding whatsoever. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
you know where I'm
something
headed.
different
Yeah,
than
entirely, yeah.
this.
I know the site, Mr. Lester, and I can assure you this will be
Yeah.
Okay,
substantially more significant than
okay,
that.
all right.
The landscape plan does kind of dictate what you're going to be putting in,
Putting in.
correct? Yeah. So,
So is there gonna be much excavation done here? Are you gonna allow, what's the slope that's on it now?
Yeah, it slopes from Kraus Mill,
Down to the
to
stream.
the back. We've done a pretty good job of balancing it, so we're not anticipating hauling off any or hauling
I was
any,
wondering
or
about
hauling any in.
So you're gonna keep everything in the house or in
The
within
only,
the?
yeah, the only thing that will come in substantially will be the stone.
And then you'll have an underlayment of stone and gravel
Mm-hmm.
and not asphalt?
Right now, there's no asphalt or concrete proposed.
Question I have, if you back up a slide with the planned streets,
Oh, yes.
we just had Tawny Town in here like last meeting or the one before, and they were talking about realigning that with the realignment of the Kraus Mill Road, correct? Through the development that they were proposing or what they were showing on their maps. So if that planned street would come out there, this planned street to the south then that goes on across Kraus Mill Road, is that just not gonna exist ever?
Well, I think that's why,
Because we're kind of blocking it off 100%, because I think the next farm's in Ag Pres, I think so, maybe it's not. But,
and I think that's why it hasn't been relocated as of yet. I know there still has to be conversations in regards to where the best place to relocate it to so that it is still obtainable. What's good with what's being proposed is that, as mentioned, it's proposed in this area here. So even if it was decided that this roadway would have to go through on this property, what's being proposed would not have any adverse impacts of needing to go around or anything like that, at least with the alignment that's shown here.
yeah, I don't know. Doesn't look like it to me. Because, like I said, the town was talking about moving up to where the realignment of Kraus Mill is, where it comes up to the top. So that would bring that road right down to this site, to reconnect back in, if, we all know how these planned roads are. It might happen one.
You mean like,
century.
are you talking about this one here?
Yeah, where that comes across, it would need to go across that property, right where the site is, to realign with the road to the right of that. The
With-
planned road,
with
that
this
one
one?
there, yes.
Okay.
That would be one concern I would have. I didn't know if it was, have you had discussions with the town on any of this, or, yeah?
Yeah, we have. And they as much admitted as that alignment that you see there probably isn't feasible. And that they were thinking more of using existing Kraus Mill Road as much as possible, before having to peel off somewhere and make that final alignment.
Any other questions? No?
No.
Steve? Okay. You're not off the hook yet. Before I turn it out to see if anybody has any public comment, I want to remind everybody that we do have a few rules. If you wish to speak, you should have signed in to make a public comment. You must state your name, address, and talk into the microphone to facilitate audio and video recording. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and the testimony is not a question and answer session. If you have questions, they can be directed to staff after the meeting. And lastly, if anybody fails to comply with these rules, I can call them out of order and ask them to leave the meeting. And I know nobody here is going to do that, but I still have to read it. So with that, I will open it up for public comment. Nobody? Okay, I guess you are off the hook. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Okay, moving on. Number 8, the master plan presentation on HB 236 and growth tiers. Chris, I believe you're a part of this presentation. Did I see that? Or, yeah,
Daphne and Chris.
you and Daphne. Oh, you don't want to come up? Okay.
He's here in case we have super technical questions. All right, let's get going here. There we go. All right, so in keeping with some of the presentations that we've shared with you over the last several months, we wanted to give you some background information that could inform your master plan discussions as we move forward. So I wanted to give you an overview of what are known as growth tiers, and these were these were created as a result of SB 236, which was passed in 2012, which was quite a long time ago. And as I go through the presentation, you'll understand why we're revisiting it now and what some of the implications for the master plan might be. So with that, let's see. There we go. So I'm going to give you a brief history of that bill and a few key points from the 2012 deliberations that the Board of County Commissioners undertook, and then some of the current implications of the course of action that was set in motion with, as a result of those deliberations. So first, our brief history. What we're talking about here are 3 growth tiers. And I just want to say at the outset, the term tier here, I'm going to try to keep calling them growth tiers. There is another tier designation that relates to waterways. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about growth tiers. So SB 236 established these 4 different growth tiers. And this is for residential growth only. It's not for commercial or industrial growth. What that bill did was establish tier designations based on the type of sewer service that would be provided to a property. So tier 1 is anything that's currently served by sewer. Tier 2 are areas that are planned for sewer in the future. Tier 3 is large lot development and rural villages on septic systems, so no public sewer. And then tier 4 was the areas that are primarily designated for preservation or conservation. And there were no major subdivisions intended to be served by septic in these areas. We put in an illustrative map here just so that you could see kind of how those 4 designations have played out in other counties. So this is a map of Calvert County in southern Maryland, and you can see the green areas on the map, which makes up most of the county, or at least a good part of it, is their tier 4 area. So that's those preservation, conservation areas. The light yellow is the area that's tier 3, which is the large lot residential or rural villages on septic. And then the orange and red areas are the tier 1 and 2. So either existing or planned sewer service. So you can see how that could look in another county, just to give you an idea. A few key features of the legislation. First of all, it had a goal of limiting the disproportionate impacts of large subdivisions on septic systems, limiting that impact on farm and forest lands, streams, rivers, Chesapeake and coastal bays. So it's really meant to address that impact of septic systems on natural features. So this bill was passed April 1st, 2012. And part of that legislation stipulated that growth tiers should be mapped and at least administratively adopted by December 31st of that year. And then they were meant to be adopted as part of whatever the next master or comprehensive plan cycle was. Jurisdictions could choose not to adopt those growth tiers. And by adopting, I mean putting them on a map and saying this is where these 4 growth areas are, or growth tiers are. Jurisdictions could choose not to adopt those growth tiers, but they would be limited to approving only minor subdivisions. And the state law defined that as 7 or fewer lots on septic systems. It also, changes to the definition of major and minor subdivisions for the purposes of meeting this, this law were also to have been done by December 31st of that year. So the clock was sort of ticking in terms of whether you adopted those growth tiers or you did some changes to the definition of major or minor subdivision. Okay, so that was kind of the main features of that bill. So I just want to point out some of the tricky language here when we're talking about major versus minor subdivisions. So a lot of county codes refer to major or minor subdivisions. I'm sorry. A lot of our county codes refer to major and minor subdivisions. So in our code, a minor is up to 3 lots, and a major is 4 lots or more. This was in conflict with how the state defined that major minor. According to the state, a minor was up to 7 lots, and a major was 8 lots or more. So we had that disparity that we had to try to reconcile at the very least. So rather than changing all of our codes and procedures to meet this discrepancy or address this discrepancy, our board adopted a definition of what's called a septic minor. So this keeps all of the county codes the same in terms of differentiating a minor or a major. So it's still up to 7 for minor, 8 or more for major. But it allowed the county to utilize the less restrictive definition put forth by the state legislation as it relates to subdivisions on septic systems. Okay, so, and you have an example in your in the presentation here. So a 7-lot subdivision is considered a major subdivision in the county code, but it's considered a septic minor subdivision when it comes to the meeting the requirements of SB 236. Okay, so that brings us to the deliberations from 2012. As I mentioned, there were 2 kind of key dates that had to be, or 2 kind of key actions that had to be addressed by the end of 2012, and that was either to adopt growth tiers or to make any changes you needed to in your code language. So our board at that time had expressed some concerns over adopting growth tiers. There was a question raised as to the actual constitutionality of SB 236. There was also concern about the limited time that that was available to prepare a thorough analysis for mapping tiers. As you recall, it was adopted April 1st. These had to be in place by the end of that year. There was also some concern that if you were designating a Tier 3 or a Tier 4 area, that you were going to be creating sort of winners and losers in terms of who gets to go in which category. And then we had the need to address the minor subdivision revisions, which I just kind of mentioned. So I don't want to go through the whole history point by point, but basically I wanted to highlight the fact that that there were a number of discussions related to the this minor subdivisions and the septic minor that were being worked on over the course of the summer. In November of 2012, a presentation was given from the Planning Department on growth tiers. And in December of that year, the board chose not to take any action in terms of designating areas for growth tiers. They did, however, adopt changes to what's now Chapter 155, our subdivision regulations, to add that definition of septic minor. So some of the outcomes of the board choosing not to adopt growth tiers and to change the definition of a minor subdivision for the purposes of SB 236. With the exception of Mount Airy, all municipalities in the county have adopted growth tiers. So I just want to kind of put that out there. In addition to Carroll, there were only 5 other counties that did not adopt growth tiers, and those included Dorchester, Queen Anne's, St. Mary's, Washington, and Worcester. The implications of that decision are that a maximum of 7 lots per parcel can be developed on septic throughout the county. So regardless of the zoning, if a development is coming through on septic and it's not in a municipality, the maximum that any one property or parcel can achieve is 7 lots. We ran some calculations to see what impact this has had since 2012, and we've only identified 3 subdivisions that have been approved since then as potentially having been impacted by SB 236. And the estimate is that they were maybe impacted by about 4 or fewer lots that they possibly could have gotten, that because of this legislation they could not achieve. Okay, so that brings us up to today. And a few considerations that we might want to have in the back of your minds as you're looking at the master plan, and particularly around some of the discussion related to number of housing units possible in the county, that sort of thing. The first is that if tiers were adopted, despite the fact that the board in 2012 chose not to adopt tiers, if a future board wanted to consider that for whatever reason, and some of the concerns that the board initially had expressed maybe had been addressed, there's nothing that we've been able to find that says the county can't at any point in the future decide to adopt growth tiers. If that were decided, adopting the growth tiers would not take away any additional lot rights. The only potential that it would have would be to create them. So we're estimating that countywide, the lot potential could increase by maybe a couple thousand lots. And that's just a pure estimate. Obviously, you guys know how many lots can be developed on any given parcel is highly variable and very site-specific. So this is just a rough estimate of what we could potentially see in terms of additional lots if growth tiers were adopted. It's important to point out that growth tiers affect the buildable lot yield and not the housing stock. So one of those variables that we need to keep in mind is the fact that a landowner's readiness to develop may not necessarily align with the need for housing. Obviously, anybody who wants to do something on their property can choose to do it and pursue that path, or they can choose not to. So if we're looking at this as a potential solution, for instance, to some of the housing concerns that we've been talking about, just keep in mind that landowners may not be chomping at the bit to develop their properties. The third point here is that due to the fact that additional lots primarily would be in the ag and conservation zoning districts where lot sizes are larger, it's quite likely that any additional homes that could be built would not necessarily be in that affordable category. And then the last point here is that as I just mentioned, the realization of any additional density would still be dependent on the actual developability of the property. Like I said, we did a little bit of an estimate, but it's a very rough estimate and not site-specific by any means. So these were a few things that we wanted to put out there for consideration in case there was any movement or thought as to whether or not we should revisit the question of growth tiers, especially if it's in the context of helping to address any of the housing needs that we've been talking about. And that's it for my presentation. Again, not designed to steer conversation in one way or another, but to give you some information and certainly to answer any questions that you might have on growth tiers and how they might affect our conversations.
Have you had any discussion with the county commissioners on this?
No.
Have them or not?
No, we have not, no.
So if they're mostly in agricultural and conservation districts, but in agricultural, isn't it possible to cluster some of the, like if you have a larger tract, bring them to smaller lots? So
Yeah.
wouldn't that be advantageous then to do something like that with the growth tier and get possibly 7? I can think of some properties in years past that would have done that, and they were clustered, and they had 6 or 7 and were all minor.
Yeah, so if growth tiers were adopted and you were in, say, tier 3, and therefore could get more than the 7 lots, I think we would probably still look to cluster as much as possible to protect any of the natural or natural features or productive ag land. So that's always, clustering is always an option, but we would definitely have to have had growth tiers adopted in order to go above that 7. In general, we also have a policy of trying to keep lot sizes in our rural areas as small as possible for those same reasons, because we want to be able to protect the resources that are on the properties and to continue to make any ag land that's available for productive use.
So,
Okay.
which would be the remainder, correct?
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
The 236 probably was the best thing that ever happened to ag preservation that you could imagine. Because if you're dealing with 1/20 zoning in the ag zone with off conveyances and all the other malarkey that goes with it, the 236, take a 200-acre farm, you start breaking that down, it's a single parcel now, because you have multi-parcel deeds, and we could get into that the rest of the night. But it really helped to steer development inward. That was the purpose of it, that was the idea of it, and there were very few things that come out of Annapolis that we probably endorsed here, and that was one of them. And where it affected the landowner the most was, and the first question that came into the Ag Preservation Office was, when you calculate my property and base it on how many lot rights that I have that I'll be giving up, how are you going to do it? And if you did it through formula, it would affect it. If you ignored the tier and the 7-lot maximum and valued that farm with the full lot potential, then you're kind of fudging the whole deal. But it really did encourage landowners to take a second look at agricultural land preservation. I lived it. I saw it happen. And the clustering, that's a requirement in Carroll County, other than maybe your off conveyances. But even that, if you add the off conveyances to the minor sub, after the minor, you're still talking about clustering. So we've had that. That's baked into the formula here. The biggest thing is, if we're gonna take a hard look at ag preservation, and I think we should. I've been harping on that ever since I've been on this board. Then if you want to even consider tiers, then you're going to have to consider where ag preservation is viable from this point on and where it isn't. Then maybe you might be able to bake this back into the formula. The 236 has served Carroll County very well as far as preserving open land. It has affected larger tracts of land and landowners who thought that maybe they could get 20 lots out there, and they got 7, plus the off conveyances and all the other. But you always get, there's always more, there's always potential for more out there because of the rules of the game. So you can take an off conveyance, you can split it. Now instead of having 1 lot, you got 2. You can take another off conveyance, you can split it. Now you have another lot instead of 1. So you can play it, but you wind up with 7 and you're done. And so when you talked about the winners and the losers, and I see Chris is going to weigh in on this one. I figured you'd show up here with me.
Couldn't stay away.
Because you might disagree with where I'm coming from. But believe me, if you start messing with the tiers, then you do have winners and losers. We've already had some losers when you're talking about larger parcels. The only question I have tonight, Chris, that I'm a little foggy about, is if you had a 200-acre farm and it was made up of it was a multi-parcel deed, so let's just say it was made up way back of 5 or 6 parcels, does that affect this 7 count
Yes.
I thought
Yeah,
so.
so it's 7 per parcel.
per parcel?
Yes.
So you see, there's potential out there for way more than we think we might have, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and we've run across farms that are made up of 4, 5, 6 parcels, and they've stayed intact all these years, but they're separately described in the deed, which makes them the separate parcel. So, you know, you start dealing with all this stuff and you say you have 1 per 20 zoning, well, you do and you don't. It's always a what if.
Yeah.
In this deal. You get into these tiers, there are winners and losers. I would be more inclined to look at corridors, where you'd have corridors that make sense instead of tiers that might not make sense. That's how I weighed into it when I was involved in the agricultural land preservation part of the county. And that's just my perspective now, but I just wanted to lay that out. Because I remember when that happened, and it was a lot of disgruntled people when they started counting up how many lots they might not have anymore. And then the big question was, when you do the appraisal to make an offer through ag preservation, what are you making it on? Are you making it on the 7 lot, or are you making it on how many lots there is a potential of on that farm? You had to thread a needle there.
Okay.
I've said enough.
So if you are looking into the future and thinking about what we're talking about, affordability for homeowners, wouldn't the possibility of having smaller lots on these big ones make it more affordable for a homeowner?
Yes. But typically, development in the agricultural district, we're looking at, there are limitations on the size of the lots for septic and so on. So typically, we're looking at 1 acre or larger lots anyways. And that happens today. So the reason why I stopped up is I wanted to talk a little bit about what Ralph was just talking about, which is that this would not change the lot yield that you can calculate per your properties. So off conveyances and all those things aside, in the ag district, the 1 to 20 yield, if you've got 140 acres, you're looking at 7 lots, right? 1 to 20. An interesting thought is that conservation zone, which is 1 to 3, is where you may see then more larger lots, because our lot yield calculation would allow for more. So, which, at least in my mind, is a little contrary to
Exactly.
I would want to think about it, conservation versus ag and so on. But as Daphne said, we're more presenting this. There are a lot of considerations, pros and cons and so on. I don't think we're leaning one way or another as a recommendation that tiers should be adopted or not. But certainly it's one of those solutions that are out there that is certainly worthy of consideration, and the pros and cons, and would it address some of the concerns that have been raised about housing and so on.
Typically, I've seen conservation lots are usually closer to like rivers, water. So developers tend to think, of course, they're premium lots in agricultural. No offense, Ralph, doesn't always, in a developer's mind, although today they price them anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I've always wondered about conservation zoning anyway, because when you really look at it, it allows more lots
Exactly.
in the most critical areas.
It's always been.
Counterintuitive.
And this is just a flippant comment, Chris. It doesn't mean anything. But
I will take no
I've always
offense.
felt like when we decided where the conservation zones were and the agricultural zones, I think maybe somebody just took a dart and threw it. Because we wound up with way more a higher density zoning in the conservation zone than we did in the ag zone, when you really look at it. Is that,
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
you're right,
you can
and-
get
and-
right down here towards the reservoir and see it.
Yeah,
That's where most of the developments are, and they're big lot developments.
yeah.
And
And-
so, a
and we
lot of
have-
streets, a lot of development, a lot
Yeah.
of hard surface. And to me, I can't quite reconcile that that's conservation,
Yeah.
other than
And
the
and we
name.
did have some conversation about that. I'm
did.
sorry.
We did
In
have
that conservation in some ways is looked at as a low-density residential zoning district here in the county. But the last zoning code changes that we made, we really focused on conservation, and we eliminated some of the uses to try and trend it more towards conservation. But from a residential density perspective, it's still the same. I'm sorry, Daphne.
No, I was just going to hypothesize, and we'd have to do more research on the specifics of this, but I wonder if, at one point, the ag zone was a 1/1 instead of a 1/20, and maybe if the conservation was in place at that time, it would have been more restrictive.
It wasn't.
Remember? No?
No, I don't,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was not. I think when was that, 78? When they finally lowered the hammer on zoning, I think that's when they created the conservation.
At the
I
same
mean, it
time?
always was a potential there because of the reservoir. When we made the deal with Baltimore City, with the reservoir and all. So it was always there as far as what are we gonna do with this land around this area? And then they decided to look at some more critical areas like up along the river and things like that. You know where they are, Chris. And, but I think when the zoning hammer dropped, that's when the conservation zone was in code, ag zone was in code, and that's when the municipalities then started to put together their plans for the future, including the ability to annex. So then that changes the whole concept of that land if it's annexed. So, there was tremendous amount of thought put into this, and I don't think maybe the planners or the commissioners at that time got the credit that they deserved. They did, both of them. The planners and the commissioners deserved a lot of credit for what they did for Carroll County there.
Absolutely.
So as it stands, Carroll County did not adopt
The
the
tiers.
tiers.
That's right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Daphne, I would ask you to go back to the page, a couple of pages back that says key points, just for a moment. And I'm not going to ask you to do this tonight, because I appreciate you bringing this forward. But, for instance, I would love to kind of drill down on this page, just, because, constitutionality of SB 2236. Well, we've been living it with it for 12 years. Has anybody brought anything, to the courts? I mean, has anything been tossed down or upheld? I mean, so how much time do we think we need to, if we were to do this? And so some of these things I'd kind of like to have a grid up there so that you could tell us, okay, these were the sticking points 13 years ago, 12 years ago, and this is how we view them today. And this is how we would address them if we were doing it today. So I would just kind of like to know, what our thoughts are concerning what was said then and what we are thinking now. Winners and losers, I'm not quite sure what to make of that, other than to say, I don't want to be the one deciding that, but, anyway, I just thought I'd go back to that page and just kind of
Sure.
say, hey, if it was raised, we had some guys on the board that were fond of talking about things being unconstitutional there for a while. And, if nobody's brought a case forward, I kind of think maybe it's constitutional at this point.
Yeah, so I can just briefly touch on each of these. I'm not aware of any challenges, successful challenges to SB 236. So since 2012, at least, it's been the law of the state. Whether there are ongoing concerns about it, I don't know. I haven't heard a lot of things that have been expressed, but that's the extent of what I know about that. In terms of the time to prepare a thorough analysis, I would almost couple that with the third bullet point in terms of creating winners and losers. So if there was a desire to look at where Tier 3 or where Tier 4 might be designated, it could be a lengthy process based on how much we wanted to get into this question of winners or losers, and really looking with great scrutiny at those dividing lines. I guess Ralph has already talked a little bit about the winners and losers, and if I were to kind of summarize that briefly, it seems like the biggest difference is if you were in a tier 4 area, your property might have similar characteristics to something that's in a Tier 3, but for some reason, Tier 3 folks have more development potential than Tier 4. I guess in the state's mind, the argument is that Tier 4 is that, let me see if I can go back here.
But as we've pointed
Tier
out,
4 is that
Tier 4 is
preservation and conservation. So you really want to limit development there, but.
Interestingly, we've already said that they get more lots from a density standpoint anyway. So the truth is, they're winning as we sit here. So it's a weird thing. And again, I appreciate you bringing this forward. So I guess the reason you're bringing this forward to us, Daphne, is to say, I'll ask. The reason you're bringing this forward is because this is a potential source of new lots if we think supply is an issue. Is that why we're bringing this forward?
Yeah, in case that suggestion is made, we wanted you to have some of the background prior to that becoming a point of discussion.
All right.
So you're not going into that sort of discussion blind. And of course, that kind of second to last slide, we tried to kind of summarize what some of the considerations might be. So,
Good.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
So I do know, not that I'm promoting this by any stretch of the imagination, but the real estate industry is big on trying to figure if these tiers make sense. Mm-hmm. So it's a constant source that does come up and talked about it would possibly give a better yield.
Gotcha.
So,
And so of the 23 counties in the state, there were 6 that didn't adopt it, and we're one of the 6. All right.
And if I could jump in just to add a couple things to what Daphne said. So I certainly don't want to guess what the Board of County Commissioners at the time were, what their reasonings were and so on. But I can hypothesize that there was some thought that there were going to be lawsuits from private citizens related to, because essentially by not adopting tiers, everything outside of our growth areas were all automatically became Tier 4, right? So there was a loss of lot yield by private citizens on what they could develop because of the tier system. So I believe, I'm hypothesizing that they thought that there would be private lawsuits, and the last thing they wanted to do was for the county to be complicit in the actions taken by the state by adopting tiers, and then we're drug into this lawsuit. So the idea was, okay, let's just not adopt them and let those lawsuits happen. I am not aware of any lawsuits occurring related to it. So, that's my personal opinion as to some of the thought process there. And then regarding the winners and losers, if there was a desire to adopt the tiers, my recommendation would be not that we'd go around the county and look at property by property and try and pick who's a tier 3 or who's a tier 4, that sort of thing. It would be more of a analytical process by which we would pick certain rules. And we would decide on the rules and then implement them through a GIS process. So the rules could be something like, if a property is zoned conservation, it's automatically a tier 4, right? So you're not looking at individual properties and saying this property owner is a winner or loser. It's just done. If you're if you're in a rural village, you're a tier 3. Set that rule, execute, and done. And we could talk through all the various types of rules that we feel are appropriate, document all those rules, and then execute and generate the map. And that way, we're not really picking the winners and losers. It's more of a situational classification type GIS analysis.
So when the municipalities decided to do the tiers, we're talking about a whole new concept. I mean, how did they do that? Because
It was just based on their sewer service area. So either you had existing service or you were planned for service.
Okay, so they based it on the ability for septic and water.
Right.
Okay. That's what I thought. Okay.
Okay. Food for thought.
Yep. Thank you.
And lots of it.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. 9, Master Plan Data Handbook, Part 2.
Pass that down.
And the
Is this
final
it?
part.
We love it.
Part 3.
You'll be glad to.
I'm just going to tee this up a little bit for Mary. You received Part 2 of the Data Handbook a few meetings ago, and at that time, we weren't prepared to give you the kind of deep dive on it. But we did want to close that loop and just give you some highlights. The Part 2 of the Data Handbook, which is, again, a whole lot of data, and hopefully is just going to be a sort of a reference tool for you, is focused on some sort of internal types of data, so mostly related to facilities and services, agencies that are sort of within the county's purview, as opposed to Part 1, which looked at things like demographic trends, economic trends, things that we kind of don't have a whole lot of influence over. It's more what's happening to us from external sources. So this is where Part 2 is going to look at sort of some of the internal data. With that, I'll turn it over to Mary.
Thank you. I first want to acknowledge Kathleen Comer on our staff put this entire thing together pretty much. I'm just presenting it to you. So, and if you've looked through it, it's a lot of pages, it's a lot of data. What we've tried to do in these 6 areas is pull out what's of particular interest, what we saw that maybe surprised us or that might be useful to you as you go forward with the master plan. But really, with both parts of the data book, we do think it'll be very useful as you go through your decision making. So there's 6 areas: transportation, public safety, land use and development, farm demographics, infrastructure, and management and budget. And we used a number of sources for all this, which is why it was kind of a long time in coming to you, but there was a lot of sources for this data. So first is transportation, and I'll try to, if you have it in front of you, I'll tell you what pages some of this is from. The transportation section begins on page 7, but this chart here, this graph here is on page 10. And what it tells you is, as well as the map, which I'm sorry is really not very readable, that half of all county workers leave the county for employment. And I think we've talked about that before with the Transportation Master Plan, but it is important to keep in mind when we talk about both our transportation challenges as well as our economic development. Baltimore County is at 20% and Howard County is at 13% are the most frequent destinations, which also isn't surprising. Also, Carroll has among, obviously, with that, the highest commuting travel times in the region. Approximately 36% of the working residents in Carroll travel more than 45 minutes to work. And what I would say is that is more than other counties, but it isn't, if you look at it, Frederick County is at 33%. So it's not that we're a huge outlier in this area, but it does reflect our distance to the employment centers. And then this map shows you traffic volumes in 2022. This is on page 14 of the data book. And really to put it in context, you can see that Maryland 30 near Manchester, US 70 near Mount Airy, and 140 in the Westminster area have the highest traffic volumes. This was really verified to us as we had our 5 open houses. This is really what we heard over and over again in the different areas of the county. But in comparison to other roads in the Baltimore region, Carroll does not experience the highest levels of congestion. There's a list that I haven't included here that we got from the Baltimore Metropolitan Council of the 24 most congested roads in the region, and it doesn't include any roads in Carroll County, which does not mean that people don't suffer through some congestion. It's just not as high as some of the other areas. The next section is public safety, and this is on page 31, it begins. So basically what this shows is that crime in Carroll County is low compared to other jurisdictions. This includes both violent crime as well as total crime, and this chart is per capita, so that puts it in good context. And you'll also see that for concurrency management purposes, the adequacy threshold for law enforcement officers is 1,000 population, 1.3 officers per 1,000 population. Currently, we have 1.37 officers per 1,000 population considered adequate. Also regarding public safety is our fire and EMS. And you've seen this before because you dealt with it with your development review projects. There's 3 criteria for evaluating the adequacy of fire and EMS: the percentage of calls that are late or no response, the average response time, as well as the adequacy of roads and bridges along the route. In the last concurrency management report that you received, there were 2 fire stations rated inadequate. Those were Limeboro and Tawnytown, and that was because of late and failed response criterion. And then 8 fire stations are approaching inadequate, and 2 EMS stations are rated approaching inadequate. And that is the 2024 data, I believe. So the next section is land use and development. This first chart does include the municipalities. Most use and occupancy permits over the past 10 years, quite obviously, have been for residential structures. There have been only 245 total new commercial UNOs issued, and that is, again, including the towns over the 10-year period. This is a little different. It does not include the municipalities. The UNOs have decreased since 2017. And up until 2024, you can see that the residential has been the highest percentage of all, with variations by year. And something strange did happen in 2024. There was a huge amount of, that one was storage. Yeah, a lot of storage and some utility, which we haven't really broken down yet, but this is the data that we got.
Is utility solar?
I think it would be included in there, but I don't think that would be what would be skewed in 2024. I mean, we can look into what, because that is, it decreased, but also the mix of them changed enough that it's worth looking into. So the last thing, well, no, the second last thing on land use and development, and this is on page 43, is the current use of land. Current land uses by acreage, as we know, are predominantly agricultural and residential. Only about 3% of land is being used for commercial and industrial purposes. And this is obviously a big challenge as we go forward. I will tell you that our department is working on a more detailed existing use of land inventory that we may get some different, this is from SDAT, so we may get some different results, but probably not markedly different.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in really quickly, just so you know, that EC category, the blue exempt commercial, those are things like schools, public
Churches.
facilities, yeah.
So these two charts show, this is from last year's annual planning report. They show the potential residential lots that are within the DGAs as well as the non-residential acreage. And what this shows, the graph to the left shows that most residential development potentially, the future, is outside of the growth areas. And when you look at the commercial, there's more potential for non-residential development inside the growth areas, particularly the city of Westminster. But you can also see Tawnytown, the Freedom area is outside. Oh, no, I'm sorry, the Freedom area, Hampstead, Mount Airy, they still have some potential for commercial industrial development. And we will be coming to you in a couple months with a new annual report from last year that summarizes last year. Also on land use and development is AgPres, and we didn't put in the exact number. I know it's well over 80,000 now. I don't have the exact number, but over 80,000 acres of the county's goal of 100,000 acres have been permanently preserved, and that chart shows the breakdown of the type of programs that they are in. The next section is farm demographics, and this begins on page 59. The first thing that we thought we would point out is that the majority of farms in the county, 63%, are less than 49 acres in size. If you compare them to other counties, it is not terribly different than other counties, but it is a slightly higher percentage of farms this size. The top crops in 2022, and again, that was just one point in time, were soybeans for beans, corn for grain. The highest livestock inventory was broilers and other meat-type chickens, and cattle and calves. This chart shows you that Carroll has a high number of, and I'm sorry if you are following along, that's on page 63. Carroll has a high number of family farms and relatively few corporate farms, which is consistent with the other regional counties where individual family and partnerships are the norm. We have highlighted Carroll on the bottom for the age of the principal operators. Almost 63% of principal operators are over 55 years old, which again is similar to other counties. Regarding infrastructure, there's a lot of information in the infrastructure section. So we thought we'd focus on schools here because schools seem to be what's of most interest. These two tables are from the concurrency report of last year, and we've highlighted in pink what's inadequate. So as a reminder to you, public schools are considered to be approaching inadequate if they're at least 110% of the rated or functional capacity, and they're inadequate if they're over 120 or 120% or above. And currently, you can see the years that Freedom Elementary and Sykesville Middle are inadequate within the 6-year period. But as you know, both those schools are included in the county CIP for additions to address that problem. So these maps are not in the data book, but we took these with us to our outreach meetings because we didn't just want to focus on the current inadequacies since they're being addressed. This shows the situation in 2030. And this is that's elementary schools on the left and middle on the right. There's no need to show high schools because they continue to be adequate. But because of the planned improvements to Freedom and Sykesville, there'll be no inadequate schools, but there are 4 elementary schools and 1 middle school which will be approaching inadequate, and that is in the year 2030. As you can see, 3 of the 4 are down in the Freedom area, and the one is William Winchester up by Westminster. And those are all in the tables. Some of them are just barely over one of them is actually at the 110%. Some of them are getting closer to the 120%. But because of the nature of the projections, it is difficult to project 5 years out. This is the information we get from the school system every year.
Mary, I'm curious. I mean, this is just coming out of left field, do we have any land banked in the designated growth areas for school expansions?
We currently don't have any school sites in the Freedom area. Well, I don't believe we have any school sites, period, but we don't. We had the one property, the Delaney property, in the Freedom area, and we no longer have that.
Is that where the senior center went?
No, it's over by Cleese Mill.
Oh, okay.
So no, we don't have, you're
haven't
talking about a
banked
new
any-
school, not just expansion of existing.
We haven't banked any land? Okay.
We do not.
That's where the employment campus is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. So on page 82 is when we talk about parks and recreation. There's a map provided with all the park facilities. And a good comparison here of area of parkland per 1,000 residents, both the national average as well as Carroll County. And as you can see, Carroll per capita and total is, well, not total, per capita is well above the national average for both of these categories. There's also a map provided on page 86 that shows all the county facilities. There's 40 main building complexes and related structures and over 6,000 acres within the county that the county's responsible for. We thought what was a little bit interesting and expected probably about this map is that they are concentrated in the growth areas and where you would expect in the Westminster area. So looking forward into the master plan, we've gotten comments that more facilities are needed of different types. That would be something to consider. Currently, they are concentrated where the population is concentrated. And the last section in here is management and budget. This is a comparison of the general fund in FY 15 as well as FY 25, looking at the span from the last master plan to this master plan. And you can see it's similar, but there are slight shifts in percentage that we want to make sure aren't misinterpreted. That's why showing this there's reasons for this, and we put this down. So there haven't, as you can see, the total is well above in the 10 years. But the shifts of spending in the 10-year period of percentages only are primarily due to the creation of a new fire and EMS department, which means now that public safety and corrections is higher than it used to be as a percentage. A change in how the expenses are categorized. There's one category that came completely out. Administrative services was divided up, so that accounted for that a little bit. There's been some new state mandates. There's been changes in pension costs and increases in maintenance costs and programs that cause some of these shifts. So it does not indicate a reduction of spending in any one area.
So what's the difference? I see public schools, and I see education other. What's the education other? Is that part of public
That
schools?
would probably be the community college.
Okay.
Would it be VOTEC as well?
VOTEC would be in the public schools.
Okay.
I can check on that. I believe that would include the community college, but it looks like it would have to be something else as well. But I can check on that.
Okay.
And then also, we've found this to be interesting and something for you to keep in mind going forward, that when you look at our assessable base compared to all of but a number of counties in the area, our commercial industrial is 12.94. That is markedly less
Yep.
than everyone else, except for Queen Anne's County, and less than the state overall, as you can see in the chart to the right. The goal set for this in the 2014 master plan was 15%. But unfortunately, that has not been attained. So I just thought we would point that out, that it's a challenge. And then, I don't know if Daphne, I could turn it back over to you. Whenever we've presented something to you regarding this, we've asked these same several questions. Let's follow up.
Yeah, the commercial, I mean, that sticks out like a sore thumb compared to
Yeah.
other
Yep.
counties and compared to, it's a challenge, like you say.
And you know, Mary, we were talking about this before we came into the meeting
Yeah.
because of our subcommittee thing that we had with Andrew. Not that there was a meeting that occurred before the meeting, just to,
It was just two.
don't want the attorney
Just
to.
two.
Work group.
Don't fry me. Exactly.
There's only two of us.
I don't know that I've ever seen that 15% number, and I'm glad to know that it exists as a goal, you know? One of the things that I was most impressed by that we, in the last, I'll say year, Mount Airy's report to us was terrific. I mean, I was just very,
Impressed.
I was impressed is the word, because they know what they are, they know what they want to be, and they know what they want to do to try to get there. And that was great to hear. And I don't know if you have a way to tell them, maybe I'm the only one that thinks that, but I don't think I am, because I've heard the same comment. I was just very excited for Mount Airy that they have the people they have, and they're headed the direction they're headed, or at least trying to. So there's a vision there that I found very compelling. So, I think the 15%, thank you for sharing that, because I didn't know it existed. I think that's cool to know. And whatever we should be doing as a commission to help achieve that goal, if we're not hitting it, I mean, we may be part of the problem. So I'd like to be part of the solution.
Agreed. So, quick question, and of course, this is from our prior work group discussion on the meeting. With regard to the commercial, I noticed in the charts and all the information, potential developable, non-residential acreage. It's just acreage. There's no lots associated with that acreage, right, for commercial?
No, the way it's calculated is by acreage.
Just acreage,
Just because that's not really how commercial is measured.
right.
Square footage would be hard because
Square-
coverage is different. And,
It's different.
Usage.
So,
So many different uses in each commercial
Right.
zone, it would just be,
but we know where the acreage is.
yes.
I'm just trying to get at where the issue is, why that's suppressed. Is it because it's where the land is? Is it because of zoning acreage or access? Probably not acreage, access is a hindrance? What is it? What is it that's keeping commercial out of the county?
So we can get you more detail on that, but as you can see, a good amount of it is outside of the DGA, which means it's not served by water and sewer.
Right.
So that would affect it. There are some commercial uses you could do on septic, but it's very limited.
Right.
And then for each one of the towns, it would be different reasons. Also, that's the aggregate of the acreage. It doesn't tell you how usable each lot is. It doesn't tell you there's a good 50-acre
Right.
lot out there.
Water.
Yeah, and we have that information. In fact, that was one of the maps we had at our open houses that showed of the land that's zoned for commercial or residential use, how much of it is already developed versus still has development potential. And so we can provide both the map and the tabular data to you. But when the folks from Economic Development were here, I remember them mentioning a few things that were important in terms of being able to maybe shift some of these trends. And I mean, one thing that stood out in my mind was they talked about simply needing more options, more potential land to market. Because if you have a very constricted inventory and maybe even you've got one lot available in a larger area that's got 3 lots already developed, to be able to market and sell that one lot is then catering to a very specific set of requirements that somebody might have, as opposed to some having a larger amount of land that people could kind of find the thing that suits their needs.
Well, and even too with water, I mean, just from developing in these areas that are outside of, municipal water supplies. I mean, obviously, I'm in the fire protection industry, but to build, say, a logistical warehouse that's on a well, I mean, you're looking upwards of 100,000+ gallon water tank, your fire pumps. I mean, the infrastructure alone just to get the water to the sprinkler system, and depending on what you want to put in there, you're looking potentially over $1 million just to build a tank and a fire pump, and that's not including the building, putting the system in there, all kinds of stuff. So that would really, I mean, really to do anything like that, you have to have a real good municipal supply. I mean, I know up at Charles Carroll, as little as that is up off of 97, that building has a 40,000 gallon buried tank. And that's a little rec center. So think about putting a 250,000 square foot warehouse where you have high pile storage, all that type of stuff. I mean, like I said, you're looking at a couple 100,000 gallons just in water storage.
It gets cost prohibitive pretty quick.
Real quick.
Yeah, we did a small school annex, and the tanks are huge in there.
So one thing I would add, well, I think Mount Airy did do a really good job, and they had a good comeback when I had my comments. But in our county, we've heard the commissioner talk about how they would like to have some more hotels, places for people to stay. But hotels work on occupancy rate all the time. And I would hate to see the numbers of our hotels in Westminster, how poor they are during the week. Where if we had a hotel in the county, that one place that would really work is in Mount Airy area, because it's right beside 70, people could stop.
Eldersburg.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotta be in an area where there's people coming through, transient people, or, like, I think it was him that said something about having a sports complex. But
Complex in Mount Airy.
if you have them, you gotta have a hotel too, because people come in for the weekends and spend a lot of money.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, we all know hotels, I mean, Westminster, I feel bad because people come in town, you typically don't tell them to look in Westminster for hotels.
No.
Because they're just not that good, because they don't make enough profit. I wonder how they stay alive. I mean, originally the Best Western was really nice because the Ravens practiced here part of the year, so part of the year they were jam full. Now they really don't have much going on.
Right.
Vendor that we work with, he actually lives in Wilmington, and his daughter had a dance tournament or dance, whatever, competition at the Pantherplex, Old North Carroll High. And, he's texting me, he's like, we had to stay in Owings Mills.
Yep.
Like, but again, he's like, I kind of looked at the hotels in Westminster and was like,
No.
yeah, no, I'm not staying there with my wife and daughter, know.
Right.
I mean, it's certainly not knocking anything, but he's like, but it was
No,
a
knock it,
pain to
yeah.
drive from Owings Mills to Hampstead.
He's right. He's not wrong. It's the same, we're planning a wedding, it's the same thing. Yeah. All right, never mind, sorry.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Good stuff.
Yes. Any other comments? No? No? Okay.
Looking for someone to.
You want some?
Motion to adjourn?
Well,
Public
Not yet.
comment.
public comment, we have no public,
You cleared the room.
so,
What happened? What did we do?
Did you do that?
I know.
so they
We
they
provided all
cleared,
the answers.
they
didn't-
cleared
didn't even
early.
Ask questions.
So yes, Matt,
I would make the motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
okay? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourned.